happened on 3 boards, as Jan Nepomniachtchi mentioned. Pawn into the centre, met by a challenge. Pawn captured, not met by a recapture this time, which is also totally fine, we should mention. But instead, the much more ambitious pawn to g6. And after a trade, the whole idea is to accelerate black's development, to open up lines for the rook, for the queen, for the black knight to be nicely placed. And now a controlling move. Not a good move for the white knight in the corner, we should say. Not a happy move. This white knight is still stuck. But more importantly, controlling the black knight. And suddenly a very clever move. And I should mention the top move of the computer for white by far. Arjun Erigaisi finds the best move, fighting for space. It's all about those pawns, as we're becoming used to by now, and not resting on his laurels, not just trying to consolidate the material advantage, but trying to forcibly simplify the equation. This black pawn was about to be joined by a fellow. No time now. There's a trade of pawns, and due to the fact there's tension between the queens, black cannot go and win the pawn back. Knight takes pawn, for example, would be a backfiring move here after rook takes knight, and white has won a piece. It's very important that the rook could come down and continue the action, double attack, but this is not what black wants, just trying to equalize, and instead the queen shuffles, and this is the current position.
So can't go for the white pawn just yet, but Tanya, I feel like that's a weakness that Hikaru is going to have his eyes on for the remainder of the game. No opportunity to support that pawn with a pawn on either flank. They've already been removed, so it's going to tie down minor pieces or major pieces at the very least if Arjun wants to hold on to that one.
Absolutely, but it does help to have an extra pawn so that you can give it up at the right time as well, you know, once you found the coordination of the pieces. And it's true, Arjun had to break free, creating this weakness, because otherwise there was no future for that knight next to the queen. So by this trade that we've seen of the pawns, he's also created a square for eventually that knight to land to. The g3 spot is where that knight is headed. And we've been focused so much on Hikaru's compensation on the right side of the board. I also want everyone to not forget the left side of the board. You know, that little move by the queen to that edge, it lines itself up perfectly on the long diagonal to be joined eventually at some point by the bishop to also start targeting some tender pawns in front of the white king. And once we see the idea of the rook lift, something that Christian mentioned, something that we were alluding to as well the whole show, the pawn moves forward, the rook comes ahead, slides over. We're looking at counterplay on both sides for Hikaru for that extra pawn.
Yeah, maybe objectively it's slightly better for white, the position a bit of an advantage because you can give up the pawn. Worst comes to worst, you give the pawn back, you probably trade some pieces and you say, okay, it's just level. But if Arjun is feeling ambitious, maybe he's going to start pushing the pawn forward in the near future, back it up with that knight. I think he should hurry and get that knight into the game, as Tanya mentioned. And still bonus on Hikaru here, pressure on Hikaru to really prove the compensation for the sacrifice.
You know, also, I feel that Arjun would love to play this position with the black pieces. He's a player who really enjoys the initiative to play for piece activity. But here, he's the one with the extra pawn and on the defense.
He loves every position, Tanya. He just loves chess.
pieces of this epic battle.
Yeah, we did have the rooks repositioned for a trade in the end. Hikaru would use his king to run up and snag that final pawn. But as you just mentioned in the previous match, king has to be in front of the pawn if you want to get it to the opposite side of the board and ultimately promote.
Yeah, you need your king in front of the pawn in order to bully the opponent's king back. And here, the white king will always block the pawn unless the black king peeks its head out. Now this will end in stalemate.
No draw offers were made.
No draw offers were made. The white king, which way will it slide?
Make it one or a stalemate.
That would be the worst mouse slip in the history of mouse slips right there.
Overall, a fair result in an up and down game between Arjun Erigaisi and Hikaru Nakamura.
Okay, so still two boards in play. One we were just at, Magnus Carlsen up against Nodirbek Abdusattorov, and then one of our lower bracket bouts between Gukesh and Rapport. I do have a result to report from that lower bracket. Praggnanandhaa actually did come away with the win against Vidit, so what a tumultuous story that game was. Perhaps in our post-show we can kind of relive some of how that one broke down, but for now we're going to stick with the two boards.